welcome everyone to another episode of my weird little podcast. It's me again, Tia. Today we have Patrick bringing us a surprise episode. So very excited about this. I have no idea what you're going to be talking about. But yeah, go ahead. What are you bringing for us?
Today I found this randomly, in the rabbit holes of the internet, Project X-Ray, and you said you'd never heard of it, right?
I think I've heard of it, definitely, but I could not tell you anything about it.
It's kind of a vague title, it could be
Mhm.
could be a lot of different things. Sounds like a superhero comic. Um, but basically, so I got most of my information from history .com. It's actually .com.uk. If you want to
Mhm.
find stuff that's about American history, most other countries have great stuff about it because it's not filtered, so it's great
Yeah.
to go to those UK sites. But this one's kind of about animals, combat animals. Um, so I'll just give you like a brief summary about it, and then we'll talk about specifically what this project was. But for basically, I guess thousands of years, different animals have been used in combat for different purposes, not just to kill people or whatever. Um, so like there's the horse obviously would be the first one. That's probably the most popular one, not just for, like I said, for fighting, but for pulling things, for cavalry, for they sometimes they did make them like war horses and stuff and
Mhm.
actually put armor on top of them. There was also dogs were probably the second most used in throughout history anyway. But this one, they even like ancient Greeks used dogs to fight off invaders. There was even a couple. Marcus Aurelius even used a Molosian dog, and they would coat them in protective armor and then huge spiked collars on
What
them.
is a
So
Molosian dog? I don't know what that is.
it's kind of like I guess nowadays it'd be like a bull mastiff. This is a picture of a dog that would be close. This is not the same. Um, yeah, it kind of
Okay.
looks like a lion, but this
Okay.
one's wearing a. I'll
But
post it when
yeah,
we.
yeah. Or
Yeah,
describe just kind of, I guess, yeah, bull mastiff would be the closest.
yeah, that'd be the closest one. Basically, like a large dog, like Irish wolfhounds were bred specifically to like fight bears, to protect castles and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So it's definitely that's why I say this was probably the second most known using dogs. They even the lower than that would be lions. Some like even I think it was Ramses II had a pet lion who apparently fought in the Battle of Kadesh, and then Pliny the Elder, who I've talked about before on the podcast, he was Pliny the Elder is actually the person who wrote about the first ghost.
Hmm.
This was way back when, obviously, but he was just wrote about it. It's not necessarily evidence, but it's the first supposed ghost story was Pliny the Elder. But he actually also wrote about the use of pigs in war, and some of them they would actually, like back in like medieval times, they would light pigs on fire and then just send them out, and then
Oh,
they would
yeah, I
just
know. I've
catch
heard
other
of
things
that.
on fire.
Yeah.
It's crazy, right? Yeah. Another one was they would use it to fight elephants, because elephants, they, it's kind of like the age old story of the squeaking mouse that scares the elephant. The squealing of the pigs apparently was frightening the elephants. And they would be frightened by the pigs and then just start stampeding and,
Hmm.
tossing people over. Rhinoceroses were even used. I love this picture. This I'll definitely post. But you can see it has armor attached to it.
Hmm.
Apparently, it was used, or it was supposedly used, but they actually have really bad eyesight. They're not exactly great for war at all. They even the metal, the stuff they were carrying was kind of, once they put it on them, it was kind of like when you put a harness on a cat, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But also war elephants, like I said, those were used definitely a lot in South Asia, the Roman Empire, the Kingdom of Kush, and those were specifically carrying. They would carry large people on what is called a howdah, which is like that huge, the basket on top of the elephant. Were carrying all the people. They could
Mm-hmm.
carry several people, but then of course just large tusks, that's a very aggressive animal when it needs to be, and it's like a horse can be directed. Um, moving on to a little bit further on in history, that picture of the dog that I showed you, he was actually wearing a gas mask. Because back in like World War I, they would use the dogs to like hunt for soldiers that were, wounded and stuff like that. But there was some, Agent Orange and stuff like that in the air. So they would actually have the dogs wearing gas masks. And those dogs were also used as anti-tank weapons sometimes.
Mm.
So they would literally just strap bombs to them and have them run out and go find a target.
That's terrible.
Um, yeah, really terrible. Another one, which kind of unfortunately leads into our story eventually, but back in World War II, they did the same thing with rats, or at least that was the goal, was to strap explosives to rats, and then they would go and um, but the real idea wasn't to just get rats to kill somebody, it was to get rats to like unexplosive thing, like like a big gas canister or something like that. It wasn't necessarily to take over people, which is Project X-Ray. It's for me, it seemed very bizarre until I learned more about combat animals. Because today they use dolphins and otters and stuff to search for, just search for missing people or search for weapons. They don't necessarily use them as weapons, but they are
Mm.
tactical animals, basically. But this one is about the idea to drop bat bombs over Japan during World War II. And yes, I said bat bombs. And this actually costed the government $2 million. And that was in World War II. That was, what was it, 1949. So apparently nowadays that's the equivalent of $31 million. And the project went all the way to near deployment. It was going to be used.
Mm-hmm.
Um, until something else happened. But this was basically on December 7th, 1941, Japan descended on the Pacific, and Pearl Harbor happened. And this is kind of basically what awoke the military to kind of be like, we need to find a new weapon, or something to fight back against these people, which is, the Oppenheimer whole thing and everything as well. So amongst the ranks of angry Americans after this was a dentist from Pennsylvania, from Pennsylvania, called Little S. Adams. He had just
Can you
come
say that
back from
again?
a Little S. Adams.
That's his
Like
name.
his name is Lytl, Little.
Oh, okay.
Kind of a cool name,
Okay.
right? Do you think it was Littles?
Well,
Little.
Little is usually a last name, so I was like, um, or
That's
it's like
funny.
sounds like the name of like Shirley Temple's, co-star.
like a character name she would have.
You
Oh,
know.
I'm Little S. Adams. That's funny. So yeah, he was a dentist from Pennsylvania, and he had just come back from Carlsbad Caverns National Park, which is in New Mexico. Have you ever been?
No, I've only been to New Mexico one time.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, yeah. That's well. It's like it's very outskirts New Mexico. Like
Yeah.
I think I've only been
You know,
once.
those years I spent backpacking in New Mexico.
That's true. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah. Read about Tia's blog later on through New
Yeah.
Mexico. But I went when I was a kid with my family. It's massive. It is huge, and there are billions of bats. And that was back then, there was tons of bats. So he was impressed apparently by just the number of bats, and he was also impressed by the strength of their flight. Because if you haven't seen bats fly before, it's pretty intense. Like they're incredibly quick. They move as a group very well.
Hmm.
there's no way you're going to catch a bat, like I mean, you can obviously, but because they
They're
eventually
really
did, but
good though at like doing turns in the sky, you know.
yeah. And it's crazy too, because at night, that's when other animals aren't good at that, but bats with their sonar are so impressive with that, and that would be
Hmm.
good under the cover of darkness. Um, so it wasn't long before the dentist tried to concoct an idea using this um, incentive on Japan. So he actually wrote a letter to someone that he knew in the White House, and that a person he knew was apparently First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. So she took the idea straight to her husband, Frank Roosevelt, who was the president, obviously. And after discussing it with military personnel and scientists, Roosevelt decided to give it a go. He actually said, "This man is not a nut. It sounds like a perfectly wild idea, but it is worth looking into."
Hmm.
So, what exactly was the idea? Adams suggested attaching bats with time incendiary bombs before dropping the animals over various Japanese cities just before dawn. The bats would then roost under the eaves of the buildings before exploding. And at the time, the majority of Japanese buildings were made of wood, bamboo, like paper, basically kindling for an
Hmm.
incendiary bomb. So it was not, the idea wasn't to cause massive explosions like the rats was. The idea was to just cause a fire because the fire would spread,
Hmm.
because everything's made of paper and bamboo. Um, so sorry, I went. So apparently it was supposed to actually go out over a circle of 40 miles in diameter, and that was where every bomb was dropped. And they were going to be dropping hundreds of these. So it would have been devastating, had it worked out, to fruition, I guess.
Hmm.
So they actually um, they designated this as a U.S. Air Force project, and Little Adams was told to assemble the team. He was the head of it. And so the team's first job was to actually select the species of bat best suited for the task. Because obviously there's several different species that have different, like a fruit bat, you wouldn't want to send over there because they're kind of lazy bats, they kind of just eat fruit and hang out. They're adorable, but you wouldn't want to send it into war. So they immediately went out to basically they traveled all around the United States. And this is the 40s. So it wasn't like really that easy to go to cave, like Carlsbad Caverns it's kind of like almost like a hike just to get there. Most caverns you have to take like a huge stairway or an elevator or something like that, so it takes a lot of time just beyond just going from place to place. Apparently, Adams actually stated, "We visited 1,000 caves and 3,000 mines." They were so the speed of the project was so imperative to them that they actually drove all day and all night, and they would just take turns. And they actually said that they covered over 350,000 miles just going from cave to cave and mine to mine. The one they ended up settling on was the Mexican free-tailed bat, and it's about 4 centimeters wide, weighs about 13 grams, which would be the same as like a dollar coin. And after they actually got permission from the National Park Service, they went ahead and they started capturing thousands of these Mexican free-tailed bats. The next challenge the team faced was to design a bomb that was tiny enough for the bat to carry. And the bats were only able to carry a bomb that was basically their own body weight, which is still pretty strong. I mean, that's not a massive explosive, but like it's supposed to just cause the fire. So the device they were carrying was supposed to be like 15 to 18 grams, so they had to get larger bats as well. Harvard chemist Louis Pfizer had just invented napalm, which, if you're not familiar, is a highly flammable gel-like liquid that once it's ignited, it burns uncontrollably. They used it in World War II eventually, but he had just invented it. Yeah, if you've ever seen it, they're terrible, terrible machines because it just sticks to you, and then the
Hmm.
fire just keeps going. So a celluloid capsule was invented to house the napalm-equipped time delay fuse, and the devices were called H2 units. the units were stuck to the bats via an adhesive. This team then needed to work out how to deploy the bats from the aircraft because, like they couldn't they're not like horses or elephants. There's no real way of guiding them at this point or training them because they're bats, and no, we still knew very little about it at the time, and kind of today. So they already knew that lowering the temperature around the bats would send them into hibernation. So this proved to be an effective method to transport the creatures. They actually developed a bomb-shaped casing that was around 5 feet in length, and it housed numerous cooled circular trays inside. And the trays were designed like egg cartons for the tiny bats to be held in. And each bomb could hold about 1,040 bats. And yeah, they actually look like, they're just like big. So they had a picture of it. It was just like big, like egg shape, and then like several rows of like egg carton little holes holding a little bat.
Mm-hmm.
So the bomb carriers were then equipped with a parachute that was designed to deploy at about 1,000 feet above the ground. At that point, the sides of the carrier would just pop off. And the idea was that the bats would then have the time to wake up from their hibernation and fly off. Once they exit the carrier, the fuse on their incendiary device would be activated with a 30-minute timer. So the idea was to drop them at dawn at a time when bats actually tend to roost because they're going back from hunting. The creatures would fly off in search of a spot to rest, with the Americans obviously hoping that that spot was a Japanese building of some importance or some lots of bamboo and paper. And the concept was really solid, and it was actually the implementation of it proved a challenge, but they were able to get the whole thing off the ground, literally being bats. But getting the bats to wake from hibernation was not as easy as they thought. Many of them apparently died during testing as they plummeted to the ground, still actually asleep, which is sad. In one incident, armed bats were accidentally released, which led to the burning down of an airbase in New Mexico. Proof of that project was onto something, but senior officials were beginning to lose patience. In late 1943, the project was handed to the Marines, who then relabeled it Project X-Ray. After some fine-tuning, successful drops, the bat bombs were conducted over fake Japanese cities created at test sites in Utah, which I would love to check out if that's still a thing. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
the
no. I mean, they did that out here in Las Vegas, where they made fake cities and blew them up,
for the atomic bomb. That's right.
Yeah, where they had the mannequins in the houses and everything.
Mhm.
That was pretty eerie to see that at the Atomic Museum,
Mhm.
But yeah.
Yeah. So a reasonable number of destructive fires can be started in spite of the extremely small size of their units. And this was being written by the chief of the incendiary testing. The main advantage of the units would seem to be their placement within the enemy structures without the knowledge of the householder or fire watchers, thus allowing the fire to establish itself before being discovered. Just when it seemed the bats were finally ready for deployment, the project was mothballed. And I didn't invent the mothballed line, but of course they put that in there. Senior officials had decided to throw their weight behind another secret project, which was in development, the atomic bomb. And so literally the next project after Project X-Ray was the Manhattan Project. So if we had never done the atomic bomb, we would have sent over thousands of bats to Japan.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
It's crazy knowing that animals are still used today. It's good to know that there's some type of restriction on it.
Yeah.
Like you can't just send a dolphin with a bomb on it anymore, but back in the day there was just zero rules. I mean, the rules are still loose today, but yeah, it's really interesting that this was an idea in the 40s. So what are they working on now with animals,
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
What are
they
they?
did
Do
the
you know
same
what they're
thing.
working on now? with animals?
No, I mean, most of the stuff that I told you was just I mean, the dolphins, otters, stuff like that. What was another one? Project Pigeon was the exact same thing, but that was
Yeah.
used to guide bombs. So the pigeons were supposed to, they were located, so they would fly to a city and the bomb was supposed to follow the pigeon.
Mm-hmm.
But animal-borne bombs have been used in the Middle East, like in Iraq. They would
Mm.
put bombs on dogs, cats, whatever, you know. I mean, people were blowing themselves up in Iraq. But yeah, nothing, I mean, nothing much today as far as like um, using them as a weapon, you know. And camels are still widely used, especially in the Middle East, because they just carry a lot of stuff, you know.
Yeah.
But most of the animals, they like the rhino, they wanted to make it fight, and it's like it's not its nature, you know. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, elephants are used, you know, because they're so massive, you know, but if they're scared by a squealing pig, you know, it's not really an effective weapon at that point, you know.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting to know that obviously these projects still exist, and it's some dentist was like, this would be a crazy idea, and wrote
Mm-hmm.
wrote the first lady of Eleanor Roosevelt. And so who knows, I guess as long as you have like a connection to somebody, you might get your project off the ground. But I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's a crazy idea. And if you've been to Carlsbad Caverns, if you imagine, millions upon millions of bats going in Japan like that, that would be crazy if it worked.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, that was Project X-Ray. It was kind of short and sweet. There isn't more really to it because they just stopped doing it, or at least so Wikipedia and
So
history.co.uk
so
know.
they say publicly,
Right,
you know.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for bringing the story. I just noticed I have a little bat here in the background
Oh, nice,
on my little
nice.
shelf here. Um, but yeah, if you like that story, you want to hear more, please like, share, subscribe. You know, like I say, if you have a particular thing you want to listen to and have us cover, please email us at myweirdlittlepodcast@gmail.com. If you have any stories you think would be appropriate for the sister podcast, Hollywood's Haunted, the podcast at gmail.com. Find me on social media. You know how to get a hold of me. You can find me. So like, share, subscribe, like I always say, and stay spooky.